Hello, and welcome back to Bitcoin News Weekly Live. August might be Bitcoin's toughest month for price action, but you would not know it from these headlines. While the bankers are off on vacation, the pieces are lining up for an explosive autumn, with Bitcoin right now hovering around $120,000. The biggest news this week, with one signature. Trump just unlocked the $9 trillion 401k market for Bitcoin. Crypto czar David Sachs says this order gives 90 million Americans access to Bitcoin and crypto. If just 5% of the capital from 401ks flows into Bitcoin, that's over $400 billion, enough to buy every last Bitcoin left on exchanges. Because here's the truth of the matter. Boomers hold the keys to wealth in America. This move doesn't just help legitimize Bitcoin in their eyes. Putting Bitcoin in a 401k also helps remove one of their biggest fears, volatility. The signs are everywhere. Never have we seen a bull market with this much firepower from both institutions and government. It's time to lock in because Bitcoin has entered an entirely new ballgame. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, I am very happy to be joined by this man right here, Freddie New, coming live from the UK. Freddie, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you, Rob. Thank you so much for having me on. Real pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yes, absolutely. So you have newly gained the position as head of policy for Bitcoin Policy UK. Could you please tell us about this organization and what your goals are over there in the United Kingdom?
100%. So we're a couple of years old now. So I'm one of the co-founders as well. We've had a couple of reorganization periods during the short life of the company. So we're really, if I had to put it in a nutshell, we were kind of inspired by the guys from your side of the pond, the BPI. We really admire what they've done over the years, starting from very small beginnings as this scrappy organization to now being effectively the voice for Bitcoin policy in the United States, having a foothold in Washington and putting on events that, senators and members of the administration come to, which is an extraordinary trajectory. And, shout out to David and his team for everything they've done. I really admire those guys. And we were kind of inspired by, not least by one of your recent guests. You mentioned you had Jordan on the show. I think, was it last week or the week before? So he, together with some other colleagues in the UK, Jim Duffy among them, put on a fantastic event in Edinburgh a couple of years back, the first UK-focused Bitcoin conference. And then riding the wave of that afterwards, a bunch of us with various different backgrounds. My own is legal. Some of my co-founder Susie has a background in finance, in sort of accounting, finance, and journalism. And then we have others who have more expertise in mining, engineering, particularly systems engineering. So a bunch of us came together, largely inspired by Jordan's work and pulled together by him to try and really emulate what BPI have done in the US. Happy to dig into some of the way that legislation and regulation works in the UK. It's quite similar to the United States, but there are a few key differences. So a lot of the academic work that we do is trying to feed in accurate information about Bitcoin, what it is, how it works, and why they shouldn't be afraid of it, to try and influence the way that regulation is made in the United Kingdom. And bluntly, a lot of Bitcoiners worry that this is a process of asking for permission. Unfortunately, these guys are making regulation anyway that will affect whether we can transfer money to exchanges, or can we transact peer-to-peer, or is self-custody protected? Can we keep on using self-custodial wallets? Those things which will actually affect us. So it's important that there's a Bitcoin voice in the room, not just a crypto voice. That was a real gap in the market in the UK. A lot of crypto bullshit, very, very little Bitcoin-only advice.
Yes, and I think you're doing a very important job over there because it's hard, right? From what we see from the headlines, you've got the FCA who's working against you guys. You guys have not had ETFs, and now you have Rachel Reeves talking about possibly selling the 61,000 Bitcoin that you guys are sitting on right now on a governmental level. So yes, I think that you are doing a very important job, and I'm thankful that you're here today.
No, well, again, thank you for having me. And perhaps one sort of takeaway point is, obviously, as you can tell by our accents, we're from different sides of the pond, but it's crucially important that each organization like ourselves looks at and learns from what other organizations are doing in different jurisdictions and really mapping what works onto your own jurisdiction, which is definitely something that we've done. We've learned a lot from the BPI team, and hopefully we can then provide the same kind of service over here in the UK.
Well, I think you've got a star-studded team over there, so I'm sure you're going to do great work in this in the years ahead. So today we have Freddie here to help us go through the headlines of our weekly newsletter. Bitcoin News Weekly comes out every Monday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern, straight into your inbox. Head over to weekly.bitcoinnews.com to sign up, or go to bitcoinnews.com and subscribe right there. This week, our headline is "This executive order could soon send hundreds of billions into Bitcoin." By opening 401ks to Bitcoin, Trump might have just sparked this bull run's next surge. So last week was huge. Lots of headlines from around the world. And of course, we've got the Bitcoin-friendly president, Trump, signing executive orders to help push forward Bitcoin adoption within the United States. So yes, look at us. Here we are live on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, let them know that we're live. We're breaking down the biggest headlines in Bitcoin. So one thing I'd like to hop on first with you about is you were just in Riga for Baltic Honey Badger 2025, one of the most pure signal conferences in the world when it comes to Bitcoin. Can you tell us, how was it over there in Riga?
I mean, I got to be honest, it's quite a badass conference. It was my first time at Honey Badger, so super pleased to be there. One of the nice parts, everyone who works for BP UK is a volunteer, so we don't get paid for this work. But so it's hard and unpaid. But you do get to hang out with some incredible people, and because of the travel that's involved and the conferences that you need to go to, you do get to learn a gigantic amount from, frankly, the best people in the business. And shout out to Anna from Hodl and to Max as well. They put on an absolutely banging conference. It's probably the most hardcore cypherpunk conference I've been able to go to, and you're meeting people who are working on effectively tech that's designed to withstand government surveillance and government control of your speech, your thoughts, and your transactions. And being in the same room with these people, I've been in the space for a long time now. I tend to do very dull work, and I'm not a developer, so I have a lot of respect for people who can build this kind of shit. And having the opportunity to go and hang out with them, I still can't quite believe that it happens. So I was in a room, and within 2 minutes, I spoke with Marty Malmi, who's the second person to work on the Bitcoin protocol after Satoshi himself, and then walked over to the other side of the room and spoke with Adam Back, who is quoted in the white paper itself. And then Callie is also turns up at the event talking about what he's doing with eCash and Cashew. And then we have white noise being presented, a secure means of encrypted communication. A lot of people at the conference were using BitChat, Jack Dorsey's new piece of effectively freedom tech, I suppose. Which, if no one's used it, it's a simple APK that you can download for your Android phone. If you're an Android, I don't know if it's on Apple. Worth checking.
It is.
It is on Apple as well. Oh, fantastic! Well, that's great. Test flights, yes or?
No, it's in the App Store. Yeah.
Yes, it's fantastic. It creates a Bluetooth mesh network, so you can continue communicating with people in your peer network as long as you're within range. And it's easy to get blackpilled in the kind of times that we live in, times of constant surveillance, and kind of a David and Goliath battle between people who just want to live peacefully in private, and a government that wants to surveil and control and effectively dictate exactly the things that you can think and say and feel. But going to a conference like that, you realize there's a lot of possibly the most insanely clever people I have ever come across in my life working very hard to make sure that doesn't happen. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this last week with Jordan, with the Online Safety Act going on in the UK. And now chat control being voted on this fall in the EU. I mean, they want to look at every single message that's on your phone before you send it, right? Because if you send it encrypted, they can't get to it. But if they have the right to look what's on your phone, they can look at every message, every picture. You have no privacy in this digital era, potentially in Europe coming within the next couple of months. So it's really important that people not only talk about these things, raise awareness, make sure. I mean, nobody wants to be spied upon by the government, right? But we need to have a means to get around it in case that is going to happen. So, of course, BitChat is an amazing piece of technology that will help that situation. But we also saw new technology displayed in Riga, and that is ARC. So if we look at our first headline here in the adoption section, ARC, the new Bitcoin Layer 2 solution with unilateral exit, is powering all Bitcoin payments at this year's Baltic Honey Badger Conference in Riga via the Arcade implementation. So I have a little video here that we can watch real quick to explain more about ARC and what it did over at Baltic Honey Badger.
And our implementation Arcade is very close to mainnet. In fact,
I mean, very close to mainnet. I think I paid for coffee using Arcade.
There you go. A little Easter egg, like this entire conference, all the payments happening are actually running on Arc right now. They're Lightning enabled, so you don't even notice with your Lightning wallet, but everything is being powered by Arc.
How many payments?
Good number, I think probably around 800, 900, 1,000 right now.
That's very impressive.
Yeah. Thank you. And it looks like it's been a very successful incognito event that we tried out. We'll hope to go for a very public mainnet in the coming months. But in ARC, the whole process is based on essentially a giant multi-sig instead of a 2 of 2. So we focus on the network effect. Users come into the ARC by providing UTXOs. They spend these UTXOs together in what we call a commitment transaction and create a batch. A batch is essentially a Bitcoin output, which allows users to create virtual transactions out of, which create VTXOs. If you would like to do a unilateral exit of a VTXO, you publish your virtual transactions and they become real Bitcoin transactions mined on-chain and enter the blockchain, the Bitcoin blockchain.
So yeah, there you go. It's as simple as Lightning. You can pay with your Lightning network, with your Lightning wallet over the ARC Arcade implementation, easy as possible. And people had no idea that they were using ARC, but this is a completely different layer 2. Lightning has really been amazing since its first white paper back in 2017 and then became more popular around 2019, 2020. And just it's grown in capacity and the amount of transactions that have gone through on a daily basis, of course, on Lightning, but it has its limitations. And to find other layer 2 solutions that do have the holy grail, which is unilateral exit, right? You can get your Bitcoin anytime you want back onto mainnet, and you have your back on the main chain, and you have your Bitcoin without having to go through any tokens or anything else like that. So really cool to see this live and in person. Did you use ARC at Baltic Honey Badger?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I love what it said in the video, that this was like, this literally a stealth or like a ninja rollout. I'd been paying for coffee. I tipped one of the guys who made me a cocktail at a bar. He simply had his QR code. I did not realize at all that we were paying using ARC. So I used the Albigo wallet in both of those scenarios. Connected to my Start9 node at home, and then I used Wallet of Satoshi in another payment. All of them went through seamlessly. It was as quick, if not quicker, than paying with a credit card tapped on the point of sale terminal. So I think this was a very, very based way to test your implementation. not tell anyone up front. I only found out like just before I was going down to like the last but one session, and I bumped into, I think it's Andrew, the guy who was talking on that clip. And yeah, we chatted on the way down in the lift and asked what each other did. And he said, "Oh yeah, I've been doing Arc. Oh, by the way, all the payments here are implemented using Arc." It's like, no way, that is so cool. I love what you've done there. But yeah, that's a fantastically tough way to test it, and it works seamlessly. I love it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of guts, and kudos to the conference organizers for willing to take that risk. At a Bitcoin conference, you want to be able to pay with Bitcoin, and if people can't do that, they will be pretty upset. So they took the risk, but it looked like it paid off. And yeah, I mean, it just goes to say what you were saying, which is it's one of the most cypherpunk conferences out there, right? So kudos to Baltic Honey Badger. Definitely need to make it out there one of these years. Absolutely.
Please do.
Yes. So then the next section here in adoption is Mullvad VPN, one of the best VPNs out there. Why? Because they accept Lightning payments now, offering 10% discounts for users paying with Bitcoin over Lightning. So Mullvad, very good VPN. And what's interesting for you guys, we were talking about this last week, that VPN signups have gone up 1,400% in the UK in the last 2 weeks or so. So is VPN usage completely normal now in the UK? Does everybody use a VPN when they want to go online to try to get away from this Online Safety Act and other prying eyes of the government?
Well, we know that some politicians are already paying for private VPNs and are getting us, the taxpayers, to pay for them in their expenses. So this is a wonderful example of politicians' hypocrisy. So I think on the very same day that our Secretary of State, Peter Kyle, was on TV saying, basically, I paraphrase, every time you use a VPN, a child dies. On that same day, Politico published an article. They'd done some digging into politicians' expenses, and they found that a whole bunch of politicians, including serving ministers, had not only been buying commercial VPNs for their own private use, but also then charging it back to me, the taxpayer, which is fantastic. So, and I think it's important to know that if they were using a VPN for official government business, that would be a VPN built and designed by the security services in the United Kingdom. So there's no question that these VPNs, they are for recreational use. Interpret recreational use however you will. Whether actually, maybe don't think about recreational use too strongly. This is a Bitcoin show, not anything else. But yeah, so I maybe spend 30 seconds thinking about what kind of recreation those MPs are using those VPNs for, which I'm actually paying for. I feel really pleased about that. I'm glad that my tax pounds are going to keeping them happy and making sure that their personal data is not leaked online.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in China about a decade ago, and you had to use a VPN for everything, right? To get onto YouTube, Facebook at the time, everything. But you would see politicians go and give speeches against VPNs while they would have it in their top screen bar when they were sharing their screen, at the big. So a lot of hypocrisy on the politician front when it comes to VPNs from China to the UK.
Okay.
But Mullvad, yeah, you don't have to give over your personal information. You can pay with Lightning and do it on a monthly basis, and you're good to go. So if you do want to use a VPN, which is probably recommended, no matter where you are, Mullvad is a great option. Coming back here,
it's actually the one I've been using for years.
Oh, you use nice. All right, well, you got a Freddie new recommendation right here. Mullvad, you're winning. And over here in America, we have Sheetz, the popular convenience store with over 750 locations in the US, is now offering half price for purchases paid with Bitcoin and crypto. So Sheetz, they're all over here in the Mid-Atlantic area, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, and they have hopped on this the Bitcoin and crypto craze, right? I think one of the drawbacks of this is that they are not accepting Bitcoin directly. You have to go through a partner app that they have. And so who knows, are they keeping the Bitcoin? I highly doubt it, but you can pay with Bitcoin, and 50% off is quite the incentive. And I think it just goes to show you that Bitcoin adoption is growing. This would be very hard to have thought to be a reality just a couple of years ago, but now they're giving 50% off to Bitcoin users who want to pay with Bitcoin. And another tidbit of Bitcoin adoption on the fast food level, we all know Steak and Shake started accepting Bitcoin this year, and they just put out their Q2 results, and they saw a 10.7% increase in same store sales this quarter since accepting Bitcoin. And Steak and Shake is doing it right. You can just go straight up to their kiosks. They give you a Lightning invoice, you scan it, and you pay with Bitcoin directly to them just as fast as you would with a credit card. So very interesting to see the convenience store and fast food businesses leaning into Bitcoin. What do you think about this, Freddie?
Well, first of all, I'm pleased that Bitcoin is being used for its original intended purpose, which is as a digital cash. I acknowledge that there are lots of different ways of thinking about Bitcoin, and certainly one of the ways that the highly advanced economies view it is as a savings technology, and that's perfectly fine. But my own background, I grew up in the global south in Zimbabwe, and I lived in Syria as well as a kid, and certainly in those economies which don't have highly developed paytech systems, I'd love to see people actually paying peer-to-peer with a digital money that move to the speed of light. It's just an exciting, and also maybe an additional thing to say there is that in those kind of economies, you often have very ingenious builders who will create products that people in America or Europe or the UK wouldn't think of. And something like Machankura is an example. That's a system that runs on 3G that lets you send Bitcoin Lightning using SMS technology rather than 3G or 5G. So to my mind, any form of adoption like this is obviously a good thing. I love the fact that people are being encouraged to pay with Bitcoin. It pushes adoption. These companies will need to develop some kind of a Bitcoin strategy. What do they do with the Bitcoin on their balance sheet? What's their internal policy around it? Do they hedge that currency? It's like an FX currency hedge, because they'll be holding Bitcoin as effectively as a more or less as a currency. And if you're being paid a particular currency, you often look to hedge that against the currency in which most of your liabilities are denominated. So I assume most of Sheets and Steak and Shake will have US dollar denominated liabilities. They may want to hedge, if they hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet, may want to hedge that. But for me, this is just a part of normalization of Bitcoin. Something that everyone in the policy sphere fights against is that regulators and politicians are terrified of it. They don't understand it. And in fairness to them, not that I'd like to be that fair to them, they don't have the time to learn about it. So we need to try and help them. We need to bring them along with us. And I see things like this as part of the normalization of Bitcoin, and a great thing from that respect.
I agree. A normalization of Bitcoin is the right way to think about it. This spurs greater adoption, and it allows people to see Bitcoin for what it is. As you said, peer-to-peer digital cash, right? It is the world's greatest store of value asset. But the amazing superpower is that you can hold it yourself in a self-sovereign way and send it to a peer without a third-party intermediary, right? And that is something that you can't get anywhere else other than with physical cash. But we know that that is being diluted on a daily basis, and with gold. But we also know that is extremely impractical, because you're not shaving off $10 worth of gold off of a 1 ounce coin in order to buy a cheeseburger. So Bitcoin is a superpower, and to see it being used in day-to-day commerce is it's beautiful to see. And every year, more and more of this is going to happen. And that's what we need. That's what we need for Bitcoin to become the world reserve asset. And in the next section here, moving over to legal, we've got a legal expert with us today. Very happy to have your expertise here. But this is a not so cheery. But this is a not so cheery story here but must be talked about. So Roman Storm, he is the Tornado Cash developer. He was convicted of conspiring to operate an unlicensed money transmitting business, while the jury deadlocked on charges of money laundering and violating North Korean sanctions. So if we go over to this thread here, so the money transmitter business running that charge was the lowest of the three, but it does hold serious considerations when it comes to developers for Bitcoin, crypto in general, and where we go from here. So yeah, there was three charges: conspiracy to money launder, to operate as an unlicensed money transmitter, and to violate U.S. sanctions against North Korea. The jury did not reach a verdict on 2 of the 3 charges, but he was found guilty, of course, of the unlicensed money transmitting. And so this case was brought against him under the Biden administration, and now that we're under Trump, they definitely seem more friendly to Bitcoin, of course, and developers in general. But it doesn't seem as if the white knights are going to ride in and save Roman Storm from this one. So this says here in this thread, this creates a bad precedent. Even if only persuasive, this case could be cited in the future against other devs. It creates a gray area where just publishing open source non-custodial code could make you a money transmitter if bad actors happen to use it. That opens the door to going after devs behind protocols like Uniswap, Ethereum, blah, blah, blah. But also people who run a Lightning node. Does this mean that those people who run a Lightning node are now unlicensed money transmitters? So yes, Storm's legal team is appealing, but we will see. I think the DOJ really wanted this case, especially this charge of the money transmitter, to go against him, and it does seem as if it did. So Freddie, what do you think about this case? Has this been on your radar? And do you have any insight?
Yeah, so I've obviously been following Roman's case for a while. And I think the first thing to say is that this case should never have been brought at all in the first place. And the fact that the DOJ have secured even one guilty charge, I think is reprehensible. It's a great shame that this ever happened, and in many ways it feels as though we're refighting the battles that were fought by the cypherpunks 20, 30 years ago. The Crypto Wars 101, when cryptography was declared a munition, and the US government attempted to restrict the transport of that data over borders, using effectively trying to cram that square peg into the round hole. And eventually that battle was won. The Zimmerman trial is probably the best known example of that. But I mentioned Adam Back earlier. He printed the code on a T-shirt and wore it openly to airports, being recorded on CCTV. The code was published in a book, so protected by the First Amendment. And the Supreme Court eventually came up with a very important principle that code is speech, and therefore code is also subject to those First Amendment protections, which is fundamentally important. Code is a translation of the thoughts of an individual into a practical implementation, which can be run by a computer device, and as such, it should be as completely unrestricted as any other thing that you think. Unfortunately, we don't have fully equivalent First Amendment protections in the United Kingdom, but it's very, very important constitutional principle that you have in the United States, and which personally I greatly admire. I wish more of the world was as foresighted to protect the freedom of speech and thought as the United States. So props to you guys for realizing how important that was so early in your history. But flipping it on its head, personally, as a lawyer, I was actually quite encouraged by this. And maybe, do you mind if I take 2 minutes to give some context on that? Yeah. So, I think the first thing to note is that the 2 most serious charges, the DOJ failed to achieve a conviction on those. And it's important to understand that when the DOJ, or when the CPS, which is the DOJ's equivalent prosecuting body in the United Kingdom, when they bring a case, they only like to bring cases they think they're going to win. So it's very expensive to do these things. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of a lot of personnel power in terms of all of the judiciary that are involved. Typically, this is why a very, very small fraction of cases ever come to court. They only bring them once to court they think they're going to win. So the fact that they didn't win on 66% of the charges that they brought is quite significant for me. They totally failed to secure convictions on the most serious charges, which carried 20 to 25 years in jail for Roman. So on the plus side, even if he goes down for this, the least serious charge, conspiracy to run a money laundering business, that carries a maximum sentence of only 5 years. This is a guy who has a 5-year-old daughter. We don't want to see him do any more time in custody than he has already done following his initial arrest. If he didn't see his daughter for another 5 years, that would be a terrible thing for a man who has simply written and run code. And I also picked up on some interesting comments from the judge who heard this case. It's worth digging these out, and I think the relevant section of the judgment is when Judge Failer. She's talking about whether or not Roman Storm poses a flight risk in her decision whether or not to grant bail. So he's not been remanded in custody, and she said, in relation to this guilty verdict from the jury on this count about money transmission business, Roman has no reason to flee. He has every reason to appeal this judgment, and I'm sure I'm going to see him again, or if not me, then the court will see him again on this. She said literally in her determination that, and honestly, I've had to read a lot of legal judgments as part of my job. It's very, very rare that you get a judge basically sending a veiled message that this was not a good decision on the behalf of the jury. Very, very rare to see that. So the TLDR is that I'm encouraged. Firstly, the case should never have been brought because I don't think it will withstand First Amendment scrutiny. And secondly, he wasn't convicted on the most serious charges. Thirdly, we've got quite clear messaging from the judge that she doesn't think this is a good verdict and it's going to be appealed and hopefully won.
And at the end of the day, he designed a tool, right? And when you create a tool and somebody else does something with it, it's not your fault, whatever they do, correct? So, yeah, I agree. This is shaky ground. Exactly. Roads, knives, anything, right?
If you build a road and then someone else transports illegal drugs or illegal munitions on that road, why is that your fault?
Exactly. So, yes, let's hope Roman has even greater success in his appeal process. But this was, again, brought against him under a different administration. We'll see how it plays out in the years ahead. But yes, definitely thoughts and prayers with Roman and his family. And he definitely has a geyser fund to help him with his legal fees, which I'm sure are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least, in order to deal with this case. So thank you. I appreciate your background there, Freddie. That was very helpful.
I'm happy to be here.
And so another piece of news that I think that you'll have some insight on is UK NCA officer Paul Charles has been sentenced to prison for stealing 50 BTC from a confiscated Silk Road 2.0 wallet, with blockchain forensics enabling the recovery of the 470,000 pounds in assets. So is this making the rounds over in the UK? Are people talking about this?
Not yet, but it's an interesting example of the risks that obviously Bitcoin, confiscated Bitcoin poses. And this story has run a little bit under the radar in the UK, but I think it raises a really important point around the extent to which the authorities currently misunderstand the nature of, as you said earlier, a bearer asset that you can own yourself, absolutely. Without understanding how easy it is for a single SIG to be transferred out of police custody into the custody of a rogue policeman, it's pretty damn dangerous. And you only have to watch a couple of episodes of Miami Vice or The First Bad Boys to know that, for example, in the case of drug confiscations, if you have $50 million of contraband sitting in a police holding cell, certainly according to Bad Boys, it looked very easy to steal that, and then just sell it on the open market. that may be a flippant example, but the risk is even more acute in terms of confiscated Bitcoin. So if there's any point that I really focus in on here, it's that to the extent that authorities, and again, I think there's almost a normalization point again. Authorities need to understand the incredible power behind a bearer asset where transactions can be signed by a single signature. And if they confiscate, if they confiscate $50 billion worth of Bitcoin, you've got to protect people. We're all human. These, in a way, I feel some sympathy with the police officers here. If you were faced with a single sig Bitcoin, I mean, let's imagine you're a police officer and you raid someone's house and you find 24 words, and then later that night you plug them into Blue Wallet and you see there's $50 billion of Bitcoin in that Blue. It's an interesting question that we should all ask ourselves. Would you be strong enough not to succumb to temptation in that scenario? So I think my takeaway here is that law enforcement need to understand if they confiscate private key material, protect your officers. Don't put them in that kind of position when they have to make that sort of decision.
And I think this plays into the wider conversation that you guys are having over there in the UK with the seized Bitcoin, right? You've got 61,000 Bitcoin that are sitting at the office of the Exchequer, and you're also facing a large deficit right now, right? And so the easiest thing for her is to say, oh, let me take that $5-6 billion and throw that to offset some of this debt. But where are you guys with that conversation? Are you trying to talk to Rachel Reeves right now? What's the situation?
We are. So without getting too techie about it, at the moment, the law sets out fairly clearly what needs to happen to confiscated property. And what happened, the piece of legislation we have in place is called the Proceeds of Crime Act, or POCA. And POCA sets out a process for dealing with confiscated assets from criminals. So first thing you need to do is get a conviction, which the government hasn't got yet. There are 2 live criminal cases ongoing. Once that conviction is secured, they can then apply to the court for what's called a confiscation order. Once the court approves that, which they probably will if you have a conviction, then the property is lawfully that of the government, not that of the criminals. First thing they need to do is compensate the victims. So the interesting quirk here is that the people from whom the money was stolen, they actually lost yuan, Chinese, or the currency of the People's Republic of China, which was then converted into Bitcoin and then just sat there from 2014 onwards. Obviously, the price has gone parabolic since then. So strictly speaking, according to the law, the government should sell initially enough to repay those guys who lost money in yuan, and then they can keep the upside. Now, we understand that there's some diplomatic noise coming from China suggesting that perhaps the victims might like to have the Bitcoin back instead. So that's an open question at the moment. That's not governed by POCA, by the piece of legislation. Then, unfortunately, the next step in POCA is once the victims have been repaid, then it says the remainder of the assets are to be sold and the proceeds split between the government and law enforcement. So our angle of attack is effectively twofold, pointing out, Bitcoin has a compound annual growth rate of nearly 40%. Yes, POCA requires you to sell this, but you could craft a relatively short and simple amendment to POCA. A piece of legislation would basically say the Secretary of State can decide whether or not to sell the assets. And if you have that additional bit of discretion in the legislation, it means that the Secretary of State, that our Chancellor, can decide, actually, you know what, I'm going to hang on to the Bitcoin instead. At the moment, unfortunately, Labour are very, very anti-Bitcoin. They do not understand it. They've not engaged with us particularly well, certainly by contrast with the Conservative government previously. And we're still expecting, if the government get control of that Bitcoin, unfortunately, it will be sold according to the process I've just described.
And is this process moving at a snail's pace, or is it a rapid development type of situation where they want that money now?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. It's probably governed initially by the court process. So the government still needs to secure those 2 convictions of the other fraudsters who were arrested and from whom this was confiscated. But we're expecting those to come to court by the end of the year. So relatively slowly, but it's actually no one's fault. It's part of the court process at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's quite the situation. And I mean, it's also international diplomacy too, right? You've got UK versus Chinese government saying, I want this, I want this precious asset. And it just shows you the importance of Bitcoin on the world stage now, right? I mean, this is a major issue. And what is the relationship between the UK and China right now? Are you guys friendly or strained?
A bit of both, I think, to be fair. So we were very cozy under the Cameron Osborne administration. Things got a bit chillier when Huawei was looking to build out the UK's 5G infrastructure. I mean, it's obviously well understood that they are spying on us relentlessly, and we are, I'm sure, spying on them relentlessly. So, you know, cordial, but cautious, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's again, it's so amazing to have your perspective. And next, I would love to chat with you about this big development in America. We've got Trump signing the executive order allowing Americans to invest Bitcoin through their 401k retirement accounts, a shift that could funnel billions into the Bitcoin market. But before we do that, we have to give a big shout out to our main sponsor here, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is the all-in-one Bitcoin app built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners. You can buy or sell your Bitcoin instantly, send sats anywhere on the Lightning Network, and you can use ARC through the Lightning Network on your Rhino app. Withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even turn your sats into gift cards with great discounts and kickbacks. Or you can link a Casa multisig and protect your Bitcoin all within Rhino. So Rhino is just warming up as well. Soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow against your Bitcoin, and stack for retirement without leaving it. You can download Rhino today at rhinobitcoin.com or just tap the link below in the YouTube description. Use code Bitcoin News and Rhino will drop you $10 of free Bitcoin into your account today. So secure your stack with Rhino. Great team, awesome people. Love Hector, the COO. He's putting out great videos on a weekly basis talking about all these things, just talking about UK and the privacy stuff going over there last Friday. But yes, shout out to Rhino. Thank you so much for sponsoring this stream. And now back to the show. So Freddie, this 401k stuff in America, I would like to play a quick video by Jordy Vesser, a investor over here in America, talking about what this means and the implications.
People to do it. People had to do their homework first. So to allow it to happen, to access a pool that it wasn't allowed to be involved in is a big deal. And I don't think anyone should minimize it just because of the pure size. But when you go through the most important argument for Bitcoin, I think there's two things that hit me as from an investment standpoint. The first one is just how overweight everyone is in quote unquote technology and stocks in general, but also just in fiat assets. So we've all talked about the fact that there has to be this kind of diversification that's going to happen. Well, 401ks are a pool that it really should be happening in, especially because of the story that we've talked about. I've written about, you know, Rick Edelman has gone on a bunch of podcasts and talked about the need to have a significant amount of money into crypto. And he brings up two important reasons. One is just the fact that if you're going to live longer, which is what AI is going to bring, you need to have more duration assets in your portfolio, meaning you need to have more growth. And if you're talking about Bitcoin and you're talking about crypto, and now all of a sudden you say, well, I'm going to live an extra 10 years, I'm going to live an extra 20 years, I think that strips out the risk that people have been worried about with Bitcoin, which is the volatility. And so over the longer term, the digital economy is only going to grow. It has grown. Bitcoin has worked. So I think for people that maybe were, you know, in their 70s and not thinking about this, I think when you start living to 100 to 110, it really opens up more and more thought process. So I think the government is supporting this, not just from allowing it, but I think they're allowing now the banks to actually cover it, to actually have people talking about it, doing research on it. So I think there's a comfort level that's growing, and obviously the price performance that helps out as well.
So yeah, I thought he brought up a lot of great points in that 2-minute little talk right there. First of all, is that people need diversification out of just fiat assets, right? People are all in. You got a 60-40 portfolio, you got stocks, you got bonds. They're all denominated in dollars, of course. And as we've seen, 40% of that portfolio, the bonds, has been in an awful bear market for the last 5 years, right? It was in a bull market for 40 years from 1980 until 2020. But then since COVID, rates have shot up, and that means the value of those bonds has been obliterated. Stocks have gone up, of course, but again, that's a fiat asset. And so to have some diversification outside of that is so important. And so that's the number one point. Number two, he said people are getting older. AI means people are going to be living to 100, 110. This great technological leap forward that we're in the middle of. That means you need assets that can last that long, right? And we, as you said, the Bitcoin CAGR has been 40% a year. And so you need that growth over time to make sure that your money doesn't run out by the time that you get that age and aren't working for decades at a time. And if you can take that longer time frame, that means that Bitcoin's volatility does not become so scary, that you can withstand that. And holding Bitcoin for 10, 20 years in your retirement account when you have actually already retired actually is a possibility now. So what do you think about this big news of the 401ks and Bitcoin?
I mean, there's so much to say here, both in what you just said and also in the clip from Geordie. I'm not sure we're going to finish it in time, but I'll try and be logical about this. So I think a few points to hit here. An interesting point I scribbled down while you were talking about bonds, as in the effectively the bond bear market. I think this is indicative of a problem that not many people have seen yet, which is that essentially the bond market represents the market's confidence in the ability of your sovereign nation to repay its debts and to service its debts, and also the extent to which its currency will maintain value over time and be resistant to debasement. All of those things are beginning to fall over at the same time. I think there's a non-trivial risk that we will see a sovereign debt crisis in the global north at some point within our lifetimes. And by a sovereign debt crisis, I don't mean some kind of calamitous collapse of our societies, because our societies I believe they remain relatively robust. What I mean is that the only way of continuing to service a $37 trillion debt in the United States, a £3 trillion debt in the United Kingdom, is by continual debasement of the currency. So a buyer of a United States Treasury or a United Kingdom gilt is going to look at the creditworthiness of the nation state and say, right, if I buy this bond right now, I'm going to get debased quite savagely, and is the coupon or the rate of interest I get on that bond big enough for me to model that rate of debasement to a risk level or a return level that I'm comfortable with? That's basically the mental calculation that an investor will make in the bonds. On the general opening up of the 401k, I started in the private equity world, and then I moved into the tech world. Once you get pension funds and insurance funds looking at your asset or your business, you kind of made it. So these are pools of capital that are unimaginably big. They are largely price insensitive as well. So for context, one of my best clients when I was in private equity was the Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board. They were a great team, really, really smart people, and they invested in really interesting infrastructure assets, and they had a really long time horizon. Apart from anything else, they were also a great client because they had at that time $70 billion under management. So you knew they were good for the fees. So they're generally a great client to work for. And I think the same applies here. If pension funds are looking to allocate, maybe 1 to 3% of their pool of capital to Bitcoin, that might not sound very much, but the amount of capital these guys manage is phenomenally vast. And so a 1 to 3% allocation translates into a gigantic actual nominal figure. Sort of developing that point a bit more. So a lot of these pools of capital are what's called sort of mandated capital. So they will have certain rules about what they can and can't invest in. And a lot of them, frankly, will not have been able to hold self-custodied spot Bitcoin, which is why I think the ETF products have been so interesting to them, and also the BTC treasury companies as basically equity they can buy to get price exposure. That's the business these guys are in. And if they can, it's much easier for you as a fund manager at Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board to go to your board or to the investment committee with an investment thesis. And these things, people work for months on these. I've helped clients prepare them for the IC meeting before you put some money in. It's easy for them to go to their board and say, yeah, so I want to put 1% of my pool that I'm going to invest this year into this treasury company or into the ETF here. And it's very easy for us. We just buy the equity, or we buy a position in that ETF. Whereas if you walked into a room and you started talking about a 3 or 5 multi-sig with a Trez or a Jade and a Ledger, you're going to lose the IC, and they're going to say, yeah, this sounds too risky for us. And you may never even make it to investment committee in the first place, because your investment rules might well say that you can only invest in publicly listed equity in a Fortune 500 company, for example. So there are all kinds of rules. That's an aggressive example. They have wider discretion than that, but that's a sort of useful yardstick to use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing what this could really lead to, right? And just the amount of things that are just adding legitimacy, quote unquote, within the TradFi markets to Bitcoin within the last 12 months is just, it's hard to keep track of it all. And this was a great little tidbit put together. So, I mean, you look at the amount of assets within 401k plans here by Bitwise, they say it's around $8 trillion. And so if you take just 5% of that, that's 400 billion. And at last week's prices at $116,000 Bitcoin, that equates to 3.4 million Bitcoin. Well, there's only 3.4 million Bitcoin left on exchanges at the moment, right? So if it all bought up all the Bitcoin, you could clear out the exchanges of all their Bitcoin if this went in tomorrow in terms of this 401k money, if just 5% of it went into Bitcoin. But it's just there to prove to you that, yeah, this is a huge deal, and Bitcoin it's not going away, right? We might come up with a new administration that isn't as friendly, but the amount of doors that have been open to Bitcoin within the last 12 months, you can't close them all. And so do you think this will have ripple effects? Do you think that this will come over across the pond, and things like this might be quicker to happen in your market?
Well, we hope so. I mean, the UK is obviously very much a follower here, and thank you again to the United States for leading the way. We very much appreciate you guys for showing us how to do things properly. So thank you for that. We are seeing some movement from the FCA. They have finally relented and allowed. We think that in a few weeks they're going to allow retail investors, myself, to invest in ETNs, which are exchange traded notes. No ETFs yet. There's an important difference there, and to my mind, an ETN is worse than an ETF for one simple reason. In an ETF, you basically are a participant in the fund who effectively collectively owns the asset that the ETF is tracking. Now, those are still banned for regular investors like myself in the United Kingdom. An ETN is a synthetic product. It's a debt instrument that's issued by a financial institution, which gives you exposure to an underlying asset. So it essentially tracks the price of the underlying asset, but they don't own the asset. So you're basically taking, whereas an ETF, you're basically taking risk on the volatility of the asset. The ETN arguably doubles your risk profile, because you're taking risk on the issuer, the financial institution, and also on the price of the asset that they're giving you exposure to. But the FCA, they've never taken the right decision when the wrong decision was available for consideration. So give them time.
I hear you, man. I hear you. But you guys are doing the good work to make sure that the right ideas come through in due course. Yes. And so, yeah, we're coming up towards the end of our hour, but there is one more piece of news that I would like to cover with you. And that is this. Bo Hines, the executive director of the White House Crypto Council, steps down to return to the private sector without delivering the promised audit of the U.S. Bitcoin holdings. So Bo Hines, I had heard of this guy before from college football, and then he just pops up and he's one of the yeah, and now he's one of the closest advisors to Trump and David Sachs when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto, right? So this was pretty unexpected. I mean, he had been a pretty vocal proponent, and he was actually quite articulate. Whenever he was interviewed, he did sound like he knew what he was talking about, and he was very pro Bitcoin. And he made it clear that Bitcoin is one of the most important assets in the world, and that America wants to accumulate as much as possible. However, they issued the executive order for the strategic Bitcoin reserve back in March, and they promised an audit of the Bitcoin within 60 days. It's been way longer than 60 days since that executive order was signed. And he was recently asked why they have not given the audit yet. And he said, "We are not at liberty to discuss at the moment." So there's been some great speculation as to what is going on right here. And Jack Mallers came out last week and said, the reason America probably isn't giving out this number is because they are embarrassed of how low the number is, that there might have been some selling during the Biden administration, since they had gotten wind that this was important to Trump and part of his campaign promises. One of which was to never sell America's Bitcoin. And so, yeah, it's very interesting to see this play out. The audit still has not been delivered. We don't know how much Bitcoin America holds, just like whereas the UK has been very open with this number, with the 61,000 number. So yes, how does this seem to you as a outside participant looking in on American politics? And what do you think about the American Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Initiative?
Well, again, Rob, I was a little surprised by Bo Hines' initial appointment because I hadn't even heard of him via college football. So he kind of he kind of sprung fully formed into the world as far as I was concerned. But like you, I liked a lot of things that he said, particularly his vocal support for Bitcoin. I didn't really have much of an opinion on him one way or another, largely because I had never heard of him before. He wasn't someone in the industry I was familiar with. And although I liked a lot of things that he said, some of the achievability, I think, was obviously difficult. Jack is probably not necessarily wrong there. I think there's a non-trivial risk that a portion of the BTC that we think the United States holds may well have been sold. I don't know how much visibility we have into on-chain addresses. I've seen conflicting reports of movements one way or another, so I kind of have to withhold judgment on that. And as a general point, it's quite hard to work out what nation states hold and where they're holding them. Mm-hmm. Our China number is a guess, for example, and maybe the United States has sold a bunch, and I can imagine the Biden administration wanting to do that, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I mean, another part of this whole entire situation is that he makes it very clear that he is leaving to return to the private sector, right? So there's many people speculating that, okay, he knows what's coming. There's some big announcements along the way, and he wants to position himself to profit from this situation. So will we see Bo Hines as the head of a Bitcoin treasury company next? We don't really know, but it is very interesting that this guy who has been so close to this whole entire Bitcoin operation within the US government just abruptly leaves on a summer Saturday, and now we're left to wonder what happens next. So yes, interesting times, never a dull moment, but I mean, with these headlines, this price action, I mean, we're just a hair off of all-time highs, and people leaving the government to join the private sector to maybe get in a better position to play this whole situation. It's interesting times we live in.
100%. And This is maybe sort of wrapping up on that point. It's always a double-edged sword. If you're talking back to the cypherpunk movement that we mentioned at the beginning of the chat, I'm still a little conceptually uncomfortable about governments holding Bitcoin at all. But at the same time, I have to acknowledge that if the thesis of Bitcoin is correct and it's going to become this globally important money and asset that everyone is going to use, inevitably governments are going to want to use it and hold it. So yes. I see this as an inevitable part of the process, even though I may feel a bit uncomfortable at a cypherpunk level about it.
100%. So yes, we're coming towards the end of our hour here. I want to give a shout out to all the people that watched today. We got Kyle saying he loves to hear Freddie's perspective. Great points on all these stories.
Oh, I love Kyle. We've met before. He's a great guy.
Great guy, yes. We got Satwise. He's often in the chat here. Thanks for tuning in. Pam, always great to have you here. Hodling Chris, thank you so much. If you guys are on YouTube, hit that like button, share this with some friends, and teach them this Bitcoin education. We need to keep spreading the word. No matter how big we think Bitcoin is, there are lots of people who have no idea. So continue to spread the gospel of Bitcoin. Freddie, if people want to follow you, learn more about Bitcoin Policy UK, where should they go?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm easy to find. I'm most active on Twitter or X, and my handle is @FreddieNew, all one word, as you very kindly spelled it out there. Bitcoin Policy, we're also active on X as well, so that's Bitcoin Policy UK, easy to follow as well, and our website is in my bio.
Wonderful. Well, yes, another big week of Bitcoin news here, breaking it down on Bitcoin News Weekly. Sign up for the newsletter, and we'll be here every Monday morning, 11 a.m. to break it all down. Again, Freddie, it's been an absolute pleasure.